Vatican City, a cold autumn evening. The air in the Apostolic Palace is thick with the scent of old parchment, beeswax, and the silent weight of 2,000 years of history. Outside, St. Peter's Square is empty, a vast, rain-slicked stage awaiting its next audience. But here, inside the ornate, frescoed chambers of the papal apartments, a singular, quiet drama is unfolding. Pope Leo XIV, a man whose face is a map of his 78 years, etched with the lines of both profound faith and the weariness of global leadership, sits alone at a massive, dark wood desk. The only sounds are the rhythmic ticking of a centuries-old grandfather clock and the whisper of his own breathing. Before him lies a single, heavy, cream-colored document, its heading stark in Latin, "On Combating Hatred of the Jews." He picks up a simple, black fountain pen, the same one he uses for his private journal. For a long moment, he doesn't move. His eyes scan the text, words he himself had agonized over with his theologians and cardinals. Words declaring anti-Semitism in all its forms, theological, racial, political, a grave sin against God and humanity. He pauses at a specific line, one that directly links the teaching of contempt in the Church's past to the fertile ground in which modern racial anti-Semitism grew. It is a moment of profound institutional confession. Finally, with a steady hand that betrays the storm of conviction within him, he signs his name. The scratch of the nib on the paper is a small sound, yet it echoes with the force of an earthquake. The papal decree on combating anti-Semitism is now law for 1.3 billion Catholics. This document is far more than just another encyclical or a routine papal bull. It is a meticulously crafted red line, a definitive and unequivocal statement intended to sever the Church, once and for all, from a poisonous legacy. To understand its seismic importance, we must pull back the curtain of the present and gaze into the deep, often shadowed corridors of history. The relationship between the Church and the Jewish people is one of civilization's most complex and tragic paradoxes. It is a story that begins not in conflict, but in kinship. Jesus of Nazareth was a Jew who lived and died a Jew. His first followers were all Jews. The scriptures he read and preached from were the Hebrew scriptures. The very architecture of Christian liturgy, from the Eucharist's roots in the Passover Seder to the chanting of the Psalms, is built upon a Jewish foundation. For a brief, nascent period, the Jesus movement was a sect within the vibrant, diverse world of Second Temple Judaism. But as the movement grew, attracting more non-Jews, a theological separation began, a parting of the ways, as historians call it. This was not a single event, but a slow, painful tearing of fabric over centuries. To define itself, the fledgling Christian Church began to articulate what made it different. In this process, a dangerous theological construct emerged, supersessionism, or replacement theology. It was the idea that God's covenant with the Jewish people had been revoked and replaced by the new Christian covenant. The Jews, according to this teaching, had failed to recognize their own Messiah and were thus left behind by salvation history. This was not merely an abstract theological debate, it had devastating real-world consequences. Early church fathers, like St. John Chrysostom in the 4th century, delivered fiery sermons, the Hafavoda, or Against the Jews, portraying synagogues as dens of iniquity and Jews as obstinate enemies of God. While he may not have intended to incite physical violence, his powerful rhetoric became a weapon in the hands of those who would for centuries to come. The most toxic charge of all was that of deicide, the accusation that the Jewish people, collectively and for all time, were responsible for the death of Jesus. This accusation, a gross misreading of the Gospels, which themselves depict a complex scene of Roman and temple authority, became the cornerstone of Christian anti-Semitism for over a millennium. It transformed the Jewish neighbor from a person of a different faith into a Christ killer, a figure of cosmic evil living just down the lane. This theological poison seeped into the soil of Europe, justifying discrimination, forced conversions, expulsions, and horrific violence, from the massacres during the Crusades to the systematized persecution of the Spanish Inquisition. Pope Leo XIV's decree, signed in the quiet of his study, is a direct confrontation with this entire history. It is an attempt to not just apologize for the sins of the past, but to dismantle the very theological engine that produced them. In an age of resurgent nationalism, digital hate speech, and violent attacks on synagogues worldwide, the Vatican is making a clear choice. But this forces us to ask a deeply challenging question. Is this solemn signature a true act of repentance, a genuine reckoning with a history of persecution that provided the cultural and religious fertilizer for the horrors of the Holocaust? Or is it a calculated, strategic repositioning by an ancient institution seeking to maintain its moral authority in a rapidly secularizing and pluralistic world? Building on that solemn signing, we must now journey back through the intricate, often painful history that necessitated such a decree. To grasp the revolutionary nature of Pope Leo XIV's words, we must first understand the wall of doctrine they are intended to dismantle. For centuries, that wall seemed impenetrable. Imagine standing within the Vatican Apostolic Archives, the air cool and still. A historian carefully places a weighted velvet rope on the pages of a 13th century papal bull. The Latin script, penned with meticulous care, details restrictions for the Jewish communities of the Papal States. They are forbidden from owning land. They are required to live in designated, walled-off quarters, the origin of the word ghetto. They must wear identifying badges on their clothing. Ancient manuscripts and papal bulls like this one are not just historical curiosities, they are the legal and theological codification of a doctrine of contempt. This wasn't just social policy, it was seen as theology made manifest, a way of preserving a Christian social order by marking the Jewish people as outsiders, a living testament to their supposed rejection by God. This worldview held sway for centuries, a dark and consistent thread in the tapestry of European history. The cataclysm of the 20th century, the Shoah, changed everything. The systematic, industrial-scale murder of 6 million Jews, carried out in the heart of a supposedly Christian continent, created a moral and theological crisis for the Church. While many individual priests, nuns, and lay Catholics courageously risked their lives to save Jews, people now honored as righteous among the nations at Yad Vashem, the institutional silence of the Vatican under Pope Pius XII during the war remains a source of profound and painful debate. The question echoed through the post-war ruins: how could this have happened? And what role did 19th centuries of Christian anti-Judaism play in creating a culture where such an atrocity became thinkable? It was this agonizing question that led to one of the most significant shifts in modern religious history. In 1965, during the Second Vatican Council, the Church promulgated a revolutionary document, Nossa Omnes, or In Our Time. Spearheaded by the visionary Pope John XXIII and heavily influenced by the work of Jewish historian Jules Isaac, who had lost his family in the Holocaust, this declaration was a theological earthquake. Nossa Omnes did 4 crucial things. First, it explicitly stated that the Church decries hatreds, persecutions, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. Second, and most importantly, it definitively repudiated the charge of deicide, declaring that the death of Christ cannot be charged against all the Jews without distinction then alive, nor against the Jews of today. Third, it affirmed the enduring validity of God's covenant with the Jewish people, stating that the Jews still remain most dear to God. Finally, it called for mutual understanding and fraternal dialogue. This was not just a minor adjustment, it was a fundamental reorientation. It was the beginning of the end for the theology of contempt. The decades that followed saw this new spirit made real. Pope John Paul II became the first pope since St. Peter to visit a synagogue, embracing the chief rabbi of Rome in 1986 and famously calling the Jewish people our elder brothers in faith. He established diplomatic relations with the State of Israel and made a historic pilgrimage to Jerusalem, placing a prayer for forgiveness in a crack of the Western Wall. So, how does Pope Leo XIV's fictional decree build upon and yet sharpen this legacy? While Nossa Omnes was a declaration of principle, Leo XIV's decree is a manual for action. It moves from reconciliation to active combat. According to our sources within the Curia, the decree contains specific, unprecedented mandates. It explicitly defines and condemns modern forms of anti-Zionism, including the use of anti-Zionist rhetoric as a thin veil for Jew hatred, and it labels Holocaust denial a form of sacrilegious blasphemy. Furthermore, it mandates the implementation of a standardized curriculum on the history of Christian-Jewish relations and the Holocaust for every Catholic seminary and university in the world. Perhaps most significantly, it establishes a new permanent dicastery, or department, within the Vatican, the Congregation for Promoting Jewish-Christian Fraternity and Combating Anti-Semitism, tasked with monitoring global anti-Semitic incidents and coordinating the Church's response. The philosophical shift here is profound. The Church is moving from a passive stance of no longer teaching contempt to an active one of teaching respect and defending the vulnerable. It is an attempt to institutionalize empathy. What deeper theological reinterpretation underpins this? It is the recognition that the Church's health is intrinsically linked to its relationship with Judaism, that to deny the vitality of the root is to poison the branch. But in doing so, it forces a rereading of Scripture and tradition that some will find liberating and others deeply unsettling. Extending that reinterpretation from the hallowed halls of theology into the messy, vibrant arena of the modern world, we now explore the decree's reverberations. A document signed in Vatican City does not remain there. Its ink flows outward, touching communities, challenging assumptions, and redrawing the maps of interfaith relations. Let's step into a university auditorium in New York City, just weeks after the decree's release. The stage is set for a panel discussion. The air crackles with anticipation. On stage sits a diverse group, a prominent silver-haired rabbi known for his scholarly work, a young, progressive Catholic nun in lay clothes, a secular historian specializing in the papacy, and a fiery Jewish student activist. The rabbi speaks first, his voice measured. "We welcome this declaration," he says. "The clarity is unprecedented. But a declaration is not a vaccine. For centuries, the virus of contempt was incubated in sermons and catechisms. How will this decree be taught in a small parish in rural Poland or in a Catholic school in Buenos Aires? We are grateful for the words, but we will be watching for the actions." The student activist is more pointed. Action means opening the archives from the wartime period. Full transparency. Until that happens, any apology remains incomplete. The Catholic nun nods, acknowledging the challenge. "This decree is not an endpoint," she counters. "It is a starting point. It is a tool given to us, to educators, to priests, to lay people, to hold our own institution accountable. It is a promise we must now force our Church to keep." This scene encapsulates the complex reception the decree has received. Interfaith dialogues across the globe are now grappling with this new reality. For many Jewish leaders, it is a moment of cautious, hard-won optimism. The ADL and the World Jewish Congress have issued statements praising the Pope's moral courage, while simultaneously echoing the call for concrete educational and institutional reform. They see it as a powerful new weapon in the global fight against anti-Semitism, allowing them to say to world leaders, "If the Catholic Church can take this historic step to confront its past, so can you." It provides a new touchstone, a new standard of accountability. However, the response is not universally positive. Within the Catholic Church itself, the decree has ignited fierce debate. On anonymous traditionalist blogs and in conservative Catholic media outlets, murmurs of dissent are growing louder. They do not express anti-Semitism openly, but couch their criticism in theological language. They argue the decree represents a dangerous step towards indifferentism, the idea that all religions are equally valid paths to salvation, which contradicts traditional Catholic teaching on the unique role of Jesus Christ. They see the dismantling of supersessionist theology not as a correction of a historic wrong, but as a watering down of doctrine, a capitulation to the pressures of a secular, politically correct age. One anonymous essay, reportedly penned by a dissenting cardinal, asks, "If the Old Covenant was never revoked, then what was the purpose of the New? The Holy Father, in his noble desire for harmony, risks creating theological confusion. This internal opposition, though a minority, highlights the profound challenge of steering a 2,000-year-old ship. Turning it even a few degrees requires immense effort and risks unsettling those who have grown comfortable with the old course. Beyond the worlds of faith, the decree's impact ripples into the realms of global ethics and international law. In an era where social media platforms struggle to define and police hate speech, the Vatican's detailed condemnation of anti-Semitic tropes, from ancient caricatures to modern conspiracy theories, provides a powerful moral framework. Human rights organizations are already citing the decree in their advocacy, using the moral authority of the world's largest religious institution to pressure governments and corporations to take a stronger stance against hatred. It demonstrates how religious doctrine, often seen as a private or insular affair, can have profound public and secular consequences. Can this single piece of paper truly foster reconciliation? Or does it, by its very boldness, merely highlight the enduring chasm between a formal apology and the lived reality of prejudice? The decree of Pope Leo XIV is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a new, more hopeful, and infinitely more demanding chapter. The real work begins now, not in the grandeur of the Vatican, but in the quiet, humble spaces of the human heart.